Hello, hello, listeners. We are back with Remap Your Mind. It's time to create a life you design. And I'm so excited to have my friend and my colleague, Dr. Kelly Jackson King. Dr. Kelly we met like a few years ago. It seems like it's just yesterday, but
I know.
but the pandemic has been no, it's made time do things. But we met a while ago, and I started working with Kelly because um, you know, it's important for us to plan in our lives, plan to pass on wealth, plan to have difficult conversations with our partners, with our family. And Dr. Kelly, she is a conduit for that, for entrepreneurs, for other doctors, and we're going to be talking about that today. So you guys stay tuned. This is going to be a really, really good conversation. But first, I just want to welcome you, Dr. Kelly, to the show. How are you?
I am doing well despite all of the craziness that's going on in the world. In some ways, it's been a crazy last year or so, but in some
Mhm.
ways, it's also been a great time to reflect and spend some time with family. So, in all things, there's good and the bad and anything you're handed, right? So, we
That's
all
right.
experience that, but I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm excited to have this conversation. I just think it's so important to have these deeper conversations with our people. You know
Yes,
what I'm saying?
absolutely.
So before we jump in, I want the listeners to know who you are, what you do, and kind of your journey into doing what you do now, supporting us. I say
Yeah.
us, and creating and passing on that generational wealth.
That's a great question, Maiysha. Well, just to give kind of my background and the basics, I say my biggest role that I enjoy the most is being a mother and a wife. But on the more technical side, I get the pleasure of, I say, bringing life into the world as an obstetrician, gynecologist, taking care of women. But I also work, interestingly, full time as an entrepreneur from home. And I basically bridge the gap between families and small business owners and kind of the legal solutions that they need, but maybe they don't have the deep pockets to get those solutions. And so I provide services that can help them to do that. And I got started, it's an interesting story. I was working for an HMO and they offered affordable legal services as an employee benefit. And, talking about this conversation, how this all began was my husband and I knew we needed to get some things done. We had delayed the conversation, side skirted the conversation. And finally, I was pregnant with my son, and we said, the time is now. We need to have the talk because
Right.
I'm an OB and he's an OB, interestingly. And we
Mm-hmm.
know that, things sometimes happen unexpectedly, and we
Right.
didn't want to have waited all this time to have our two beautiful children and not have a plan to leave a legacy behind for them. So
That's
we started the conversation. It was a pre-conversation before, and then it was the conversation when it was
right.
like, okay, now we need to put pen to paper.
That's right. That's right. And it's so important. I mean, and I think especially when kids become involved, that's when we wake up like, ooh.
Yes, we should do it before, but somehow, we all have prompters in our lives that
Mhm,
bring us to a point where we say it's time. But it was
mhm.
one of the best conversations we had. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's powerful. I know for myself, before I had my son, I knew about like, of course, because I'm a physician, same, right? That
yeah.
that there was it's important to have those end of life conversations, but I didn't have the context for generational wealth because I didn't have a child. And so now,
Yeah.
yeah, so now I have this 6-year-old, and all I can think about is, if God forbid something were to happen to me, like, what am I leaving him? What am I leaving him to set him up for his future? Right.
Absolutely.
And so, it's a conversation that I have with my mom because I'm a single mom right now. Right. So it's a
Yes.
conversation that I have with my mom, with my son's father, with my father, in the
Yes.
case of, and even with my sisters, because I think it's
Absolutely.
important that they all kind of know, these are my
Mhm.
wishes. This is what this is who I want to take care of Delson. This is what
Yes,
I wish if I were to become incapacitated, and also to set up structures, specific structures that will get passed down to Delson. If he's a minor, they go into a trust, but to get passed down so he's all set for his future, no matter what happens to me.
absolutely. I agree with you 100%. It for me, we had the financial side of it,
Mhm,
and we had the what I call the purely human love side of it.
mhm,
So when I was pregnant and when I was having my children, I did the thought that if something happened, that there wasn't a plan in place where I pre-thought about exactly who I would want to care for my children,
mhm.
that emotionally was enough to prompt me to say, take a step. And then the second part of it was my things, right? And so
Mhm.
I also wanted to make sure everything that I had worked so hard for was going to get passed down, that I can leave a love legacy. I actually think about this planning as a love legacy. So
Yes.
sometimes we think of it as a financial legacy, but I
Mhm.
like to make it also a really positive thing, a love legacy, saying I care about you enough to one, provide for you if something and I can't physically care for you, and
Yeah.
two, I've worked so hard for things. I love you and I want you to have those things. So
Yeah.
I reframe it in my mind that way, as opposed to framing it in my mind of I I'm going to die. We all know that, but
Right.
it's a love legacy that I'm really focusing on.
I really love that reframing, that it's a love legacy. Now I want to point to something though. We sometimes, I think in our culture, when we talk about leaving a financial legacy, there is sometimes a negative connotation, like, oh, at least from the generation before us, like our parents,
Hmm.
or they want to kill us so they can have some money, kind of
Yeah.
thinking, right? So I really want to like get underneath that, because I think that's a reason why we are not primed right away to leave these financial legacy. And sometimes we think financial legacy, it gives us sort of a negative feeling inside,
Yeah.
like it's not a positive thing. And I feel like leaving a financial legacy is a positive thing, in addition to leaving a love legacy. I think that's one of the things we need to remap our minds around, is that leaving money to our kids is a great thing. It's not a bad thing. And there are multiple different ways that you can do it. And you have to be able to um, you know, get from I think the media and the movie industry has painted this whole life insurance and the leaving the financial legacy in a bad manner,
Mm.
right? Because then it's like, oh well, if I tell my kids that I have life insurance,
You're gonna knock
then
me off.
they're gonna try to knock me off. And
That's right. You and
and
I
it's
said the same phrase, knock me off, right?
right, right. It's like they're gonna throw mama from the train, to try to get that life insurance. And it's not like that.
Not at
And
all.
so I think that, and especially when you put sometimes you can put conditions on when your kids
Absolutely.
receive these things. And when you explain to the kids, hey, I'm leaving you a legacy. This is my legacy to you. This is my gift to
Absolutely.
you. Then it's not just like, when I die, you're gonna get a bunch of money. So then your kids are just waiting for you to die, right? Or you
No,
think that.
yeah.
That's never the case. So I think we have to really reframe our minds around like what it means to leave a financial legacy, so that we can really be actively involved in creating that. Because I can tell you, the conversation from my mom was like, oh, you can't take it to the grave. So, and I'm like, well, I mean, that's true,
That is,
but
yes,
you can give a gift.
that's
you
right.
know?
I love how your mom said you can't take it to the grave. So why don't we gift it to the people that we care about? So we can
Right.
just add on to what she said. It doesn't mean that we don't think about it because you can't take it to the grave. It's
Exactly.
all the more reason to think about it so that I can bless the people I care about.
Exactly.
And we may get into some of the statistics as we go along, but the statistics are pretty alarming, particularly in the Black and Brown community. And
Hmm.
that is something that I'm extremely passionate about. It almost
Right.
hurts my heart to see that everybody loves their family just as much as the next culture,
Mhm.
but somehow we have this taboo and stigma surrounding having the conversation to the point where it's actually a detriment that follows generation after generation. And that
Yes, it is.
bothers me
Yeah.
because the love legacy is the same. So
Yes.
now we just need to attach the financial legacy
That's right.
so that we can make the next generation stronger,
That's
stronger,
right.
stronger. So I don't like people to think of it as an ending point. I like them to think of it as a beginning point.
Right.
You are
Right.
starting the next generation. And
Yes.
sometimes we use generation, but let's also be honest, there are people without children,
That's
right?
right.
There are people who have not had a family yet, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's still, so yes, we think generation, but it's just a love legacy. It
Right.
might be a love legacy for your parent
That's
who's
right.
elderly that you want to care for.
That's
It
right.
might be a love legacy for your nieces and your
Nephews.
sister or your
That's right.
brother.
That's right.
So, yes, generational, but let's talk about a love legacy, the
To the
people I
family.
love and
That's
care
right.
about.
I love it. Oh, so so good, so good. Really, really love that. And you know, we want to talk statistics. You know, I was reading that white people have 8 times the wealth, 8 times the wealth as Black families. Like that's what's happening. The love legacy is the same, but 8 times the
Mhm.
wealth of you know, we're at a deficit.
Yes. Mhm.
And that's only because we're really not having the conversations. And I also think, Dr. Kelly, that is because we think it's hard. We
Yes.
think it's going to be too hard. We think we have to be millionaires. We think we
Yes.
have to be rich in order to leave a legacy. But if you've ever read, and I know we've discussed this book, the Millionaire Next Door,
Yes.
that
Mhm.
book is the most transformational book because it really goes to show that it's not about you having to be a millionaire. You can make $50,000. You can make, you know, $30,000. It's how you approach the wealth. It's how you do it little by little. You got to start somewhere. And even if you start, you know, at $25 a month, you know,
Absolutely.
even if you start like that, you can build and that capitalizes over the years, right? And if you invest it in the right places and you put it in the right places to create those legacies, then it works. Or, you know, another thing is if you have a child or a niece or nephew, you can put a little bit of money away a month. And if the kid is like 6 or 7, come
Ex
on, you know.
Oh my goodness. It doesn't take a lot, Maisha, does not take a lot. You and I know
Hmm.
that. But it does take a shifting of the mindset,
Absolutely.
right? And so you touched upon some really important points. Many people think that I don't need to think about these things if I don't have a lot. Now,
Hmm.
everyone's definition of a lot can be very different, but if
That's right.
you've worked hard for something, you've worked hard for it, and you should want to have some control over it, right?
Hmm.
The second thing you mentioned was is that you don't have to be, we think of estates and planning for people who have $1 million and they're the CEOs of companies
Hmm.
or they're the movie stars. And so
Hmm.
we discount ourselves from the conversation.
Hmm.
And I think we need to stop discounting ourselves because we've worked just as hard as the next person.
Hmm.
We can set something aside, and whatever we've set aside, we want to pass on to the next generation. I start even as small as you've got a car and you don't want it to get sent to the wrong person who comes
Hmm.
swooping in. We've all heard these stories,
Right, right.
swooping in on at the funeral, taking things that you didn't
Right,
have any control over because you didn't
right.
simply outline it, right?
Mhm,
Outline what you wanted.
mhm,
Or setting aside bank accounts that people forget about when
mhm.
someone passes away. Here's an interesting statistic. It is estimated that the state government controls about $40 billion in unclaimed money and funds.
What?
$40 billion. Okay.
Oh my
Now,
God.
I don't think necessarily it's the government trying to keep
Right.
on to that money. It's because people did not outline who their
Mhm,
beneficiaries were, where they
mhm,
were, who they
Mhm.
wanted to have what. They forgot about that 401k from a job 20 years ago, or the person who was left behind didn't know about
Mhm.
it because they didn't outline it. And these
Right.
things simply get lost. $40 billion. And what is
Wow.
concerning to me is I don't think that $40 billion that is out there, that's never going back to the people it was intended for, is coming from communities that planned. Let's just be
Mm-mm.
honest.
Nah,
That
man.
40 billion is coming from the very people who needed it the most,
Mhm.
whose families could have benefited the
Mhm.
most by
Mhm.
taking that hour, whatever amount of time, to
Mhm.
simply document what you have and where
Mhm.
you want it to go, to
Mhm.
simply update your beneficiaries on those documents that have
Yes.
beneficiaries. How many
Mhm.
stories do we hear that a beneficiary was someone from 15 years ago, maybe an ex?
Oh, no.
X, something happens,
Ooh.
and now they have a new life, a new relationship, but when they pass away, the beneficiary is the person that will inherit that. So we have to have these conversations so that we, again, are leaving that legacy behind to the very people we care about.
That's
But
right.
yeah, $40 billion.
That begs the question, is there a way for people who think they might, have unclaimed, is there a way for them to see if they have unclaimed money?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And in fact, there are services where you can go online and input your information and see if there's any unclaimed funds out there with your name on it. And
Mm.
I would ask people to do that if they have questions about their parent that passed away, a
Mhm.
grandparent, and I believe there may be things where I may be the beneficiary. Please go and use those services, okay?
Right.
Be careful because there's a lot of them that may not be reputable and they're really
Mhm.
just trying to get information, but there's some really good ones. Also make sure that they are being, that there's some history behind them,
Mhm.
particularly if the state or the government is saying this is a service that can be helpful to you. So
Mhm.
yeah, there are some services out there, but I'm about being proactive for the here
Mhm.
and the now. What
Absolutely.
can we do? How can we start this conversation with
Right.
our family in an effective, productive way?
So let's get to that. Like what is the first step? Like first of all, how do you bring this conversation up with a family member? Because it's so uncomfortable, right? Like
Yeah.
when you start talking about death and dying, people are just so nervous about talking about that kind of stuff. Oh, let's not talk about it. So
Yeah,
how do
like
you
it'll
bring it?
go away, right? Like if we don't
Hmm.
talk about it, it'll
Right,
just
right.
go.
We're just gonna live forever if we
It
never talk
just
about
won't
dying.
happen. Well, I have found and learned some helpful hints along the way. And maybe because I'm a doctor, I love acronyms. I had to learn so many things in my life. So I learned some
Good.
acronyms that can help us to kind of remember, kind of the steps to take. And the acronym that I have is, let's see, I wrote it down to help people. I am in a positive place of love. Okay. So the I stands for you taking a moment and thinking about what you want. Okay. So the people, right? The people being, who do I want to pass things on to, otherwise sometimes known as beneficiaries? But then who do I want to be my personal representative? Who do I want to be the guardian of my child? Who do
Mhm.
I want to be the trustee? Two different things people don't know about. Guardian is who cares for your child, trustee is who has the financial responsibilities related to your
Mhm.
finances, related to your children. Usually the same person, but they can be the be one and the same.
Mhm.
And then the second thing you need to think about is, let me take a moment and figure out what it is that I have, right? So a part
Mhm.
of the I is you taking a moment for yourself first.
Mhm.
And then drawing in the people who would be involved, right? So if you choose a personal representative, I need to speak to them. So you're making a plan, right? You're kind of making a
Mhm.
plan. I want to speak to my beneficiaries, particularly if they're adults or maybe they're
Mhm.
young adults, right? So they kind of know what to expect.
Mhm.
And anyone else that would be involved, the guardian, the trustee, because you have to have that conversation with them. You do not want it to be at your passing. All of a sudden, the person you chose to be your personal representative is feeling like, I don't know if I can handle that responsibility. Or the
Right.
person you thought you wanted to be the guardian is feeling like maybe that's not a role they want to take. So we
Mhm.
want to have those conversations. I like to say the A in that is asking.
Mhm.
Asking. It is so important. Some people feel like they want to take a more direct approach to have the conversation. Other
Mhm.
people want to have a more indirect approach. If you're in a relationship, I believe the relationship, it should always start with you and your partner first. So you,
Mhm.
then you and your partner having the conversation. So a direct approach would be asking to set up a time, a date to have the conversation.
Mhm.
When we ask questions, it gives buy-in as opposed to I'm just telling you this is what I want and this is who should raise our children. So we're asking, okay?
Mhm.
And then the indirect approach would be, oh, I heard about so and so who had this situation. What do you
Mhm.
feel about that? How would
Mhm.
you like to handle that? If
Right.
that was me, this is what I would want. Right. So
Mhm.
it's a little bit of an indirect approach. Oh, you remember when Michael Jackson died? This happened and this happened. And so it's a
Mhm.
way to start the conversation in a
Mhm.
slow manner
Mhm.
and in a positive manner.
Yes.
Because you always want to start, if it is a difficult conversation, slow and positive.
Mhm.
Okay. So
Mhm.
those are kind of good ways to kind of get started in the conversation.
Mhm.
It's just to open up the doors before maybe even going into the
Right.
specifics.
Right.
So that's just a kind of good way to get started. And I have some
That's
other things
perfect.
that kind of go with the I am in a positive place, love, but
Right. 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 Well, I think that's, oh my gosh, that those are some really great starts. And man, I feel like we are gonna need another conversation because we talked about generational wealth, but I think one of the things that I want to talk more deeply about as you're going through the I am in a positive place of love, I think I want to talk more deeply about um the what is the word that I want to use? Um last wishes.
yes.
And I think this we're segueing into that conversation because stating those sort of last wishes also is related to the wealth, the generational wealth piece as
Absolutely.
well. And
Absolutely.
so I'm going to say already,
Mhm.
I always call it out. This is part one of part two for us.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'd
Yes,
love to come back. I'd love to share some more information. It's amazing when you start talking, the time just flies.
it does, doesn't it?
But yeah, we have to think about those other parts of it, right? So, like
Hmm.
you said, the people, the money, how to start the conversation.
Hmm.
If I could just backtrack a little bit too, in terms of
Yeah.
starting the conversation, another part about that is choosing a neutral time in the neutral place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It is, the worst time, but sometimes we do it, is to talk about it when someone is sick, right? You want
Mm.
to have the conversation, preferably before someone is ill.
Hmm. Hmm.
Much we want to neutralize things, neutralize it, right? This
Hmm.
is just a conversation, right?
Hmm.
And a neutral place, right? The ICU is not the neutral place.
Oh my gosh, no.
So yeah, I'm doing a series around the coffee table, and around the coffee table is like having these conversations in a
Right.
neutral place around the coffee table, so that we are doing what wealthy families and other families do. They have these conversations
Hmm.
so that they are treating their family almost like a business entity, right? And as a business
Hmm.
entity, we talk about finances, we talk
Hmm.
about how to pass things on and how to
Hmm.
build leaders in the business, right? Well, that's
Yes.
kind of what we're doing as a family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think that um when we talk, this is just so interesting. I think that you brought it right on back to generational wealth. And when we people people who know me know that I know how to leave a cliffhanger. And
Ah,
so and so I I, I want to put a pin in it, although I don't want to put a pin in it, because
yes.
I think that man, where we're gonna go next when we start talking about having these conversations in a neutral environment, not when you're sick, and what to say in these conversations, and what to think about when you're thinking about last wishes. these are so super important because the worst thing, and I've experienced it as a physician taking care of people in the
Absolutely.
ICU, is to have people fighting over what next to do. It's the
Oh
worst
my gosh.
experience for the family. It's a bad experience for the doctor to experience, but it's worse for the family involved to not know, to not have those wishes laid out. So that's kind of that's our cliffhanger point. And what I want to ask you to give the listeners is how can they keep up with you? Because I think the services that you provide, that you help the community with, are so important. And I want them to be able to follow you and to reach out to you to start having these types of conversations.
Awesome. I definitely will leave some of my information. People can reach out to me via email, and my email is ls.kjackking@gmail.com. But probably one of the best ways to reach out to me is on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/ask Dr. Kelly, and that's DR for the doctor. So facebook.com/ask Dr. Kelly. Would be happy to share with you with everyone the program that my husband and I use. It was a very affordable solution, and it really just helped us to open up the conversation in a very neutral fashion because we could put pen to paper and it wasn't as emotional by having that service in place.
Yes, and it's a service that I use as well, and that I use through Dr. Kelly as well. So we will have all of her information in the show notes, you all. And again, this is part one of part two. And so, Dr. Kelly, I'm going to ask for you to get back on my calendar so we
Okay.
can finish this conversation because I
I
think we
love it.
did. It's such a big conversation to
Yes.
have that it should be split up. It's more comfortable that way. Although, I've never been one to make people comfortable. I'm always about kicking people out of their comfort zone, which is one of the reasons why I have this podcast and I do what I do with my mind remapping. However, I don't want to completely scare people away.
That's right. You're like, look, well, remember I said slow, right? Start
So,
the conversation slow and positive because it
slow and
should end
positive.
detailed and still positive, right?
Right.
Now, what are the
Absolutely.
action steps that I need to go through? But we
Mhm.
start by starting a conversation.
That's right. Well, we have started the conversation and we will continue it on the next conversation. And thank you so much, Dr. Kelly, for coming on today and for sharing your wisdom and for, just the dialogue about the things that we need to be thinking about as we move forward to begin to create this generational wealth for our families, this love legacy for our families, for our children, or even our parents and our sisters and our
Absolutely.
siblings, and the people that we most love and care about in our lives. So I look forward to talking with you again. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. It was a pleasure being on, and I'm so looking forward to hopefully meeting some of the people that we can help.
All right, all right. Well, you all heard it. This is part one of a two-part series, and you will be hearing from Dr. Kelly again. We will have her information on the show notes. So you can go to facebook.com/ask Dr. Kelly. And then you can also go to kellyjacksonking.com as well and check her out. And of course, if you want some mind remapping, some that deeper work to get you past the unconscious conversations that may be keeping you stuck from having these types of important conversations, you all know where to find me, remapmymind.com. But the guest of the day is Dr. Kelly. So go check her out. We love our listeners. So I want to thank you for being with us. Without the listeners, there is no podcast. So please, if you like the show, share it and leave a little review. All right, we will see you on the next one. You guys have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Namaste.
Bye bye.